of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to this event. It means an awful lot to me, and I've been planning on doing this and thinking about it for a real long time. I got to go back to the first event I put on here for Ack Miller. And Ack was a hot rodder's hot rodder, a race driver's race driver. There's nothing that he didn't do. And we were actually friendly competitors in the turbocharger business. I was vice president of a turbocharger company when he was in the turbo business. And long story short, my foreman came in one day and he says, there's a guy who wants to sell me a new turbo. I said, well, go ahead and buy it. Yeah, but he's got 500 brand new Garrett turbos, I see. So I went out and saw the fellow, and I said, well, you know, I don't carry that kind of cash, so if you come back tomorrow, I'll have it for you. And the price was just chump change. So anyway, I called around, Custom Turbo, every turbo shop, Turbonetics, talked to Bob Keller, talked to everybody. And the last guy I called was Ack. And I said, there's a guy out here who's got 500 brand new turbos he wants to sell me. And he says, that bastard stole them from me. So that kind of started the whole deal. And sure enough, the fellow came back with a school bus, you know, the conventional kind, jam-packed with turbos. And of course, the cops were waiting for him, and off he went. But after that, Ack and I became really close. Not that I wasn't aware of it before, but in this room at that time was the 5 guys that are here today. And I just came off the cuff. I said, you know, with Louie Senter and Iskey and Hilborn and everybody here, why, you could build an engine. Carrillo rods and Iskey cam and Hilborn fuel injection and Louie, what didn't Louie make? You know, who didn't have a set of Anson wheels or an Anson shifter? There's, you know, something wrong with you back in the day anyway. But anyway, so I'm here to honor these 5 guys. And I'd love to give them a great big round of applause if you'll all do that for me. You know, what they've not only done for our country, and in Nick's case, he was in the Korean War, and the other fellows were in the Second World War. But what they've done for racing and hot rodding in general, there isn't a race car that I know of that doesn't have a set of Carrillo rods and a Hilborn fuel injection and Iskey cam. And it's just the way it was. And Anson, you know what Louie did way back when was guys were blowing their feet off and everything. The flywheels were coming apart. He would take a car to the drag strips. Of course, he kind of disabled the drive or the flywheel, but he purposely blow it up in his scatter shield. He showed how that thing contained all the shrapnel. So anyway, moving on. This is you know, you fellas haven't seen each other in years, I'm sure, so this is also a good day. I don't want to spend a lot of time sitting in a chair. I'd rather we get to know one another and see guys we haven't seen in a long time and have a luncheon and stuff like that. But I've got some sponsors I want to thank and recognize for helping me put this event on. Arias Pistons, of course. CP Carrillo. Iskenderian Racing Camps. Is Richard here? Ed? Your son? Is he here?
Maybe don't know how to find it.
Oh, there he is. Okay. And Hilborn fuel injection. If you saw the Goodwill card out front, unfortunately Stu won't be here to join us. He's, you know, his health is such that he can't really leave home much. So, but we're going to send him this video that that my friend Bruce Hamilton is taking of the event. So he'll get to see what happened here. Naturally, I couldn't put this event on if it weren't here, and I wouldn't do it anyplace else. This place is, when Wally started it, and Steve Gibbs was the first director, boy, it's an evolving museum. I mean, I don't even think it'd be a good word to call it a museum. It's hot rod history right here. And all of us are racers, or 99% of us are racers, so we know what it's like, what it means. Now, many guys just got started on the fly, and like Don Prudhomme and so many others went on to some wonderful things in the sport. Where's Dave McClelland? You hear that? Oh, hey, Dave. Oh, hey, Greg Sharp, right there. You know, it's interesting. I'm jumping around. I don't want to do that, but, well, I won't jump right into it, Dave, so I don't lose my track, my spot here. Bruce Hamilton, I started telling you about Bruce. There's so much talent in high desert, guys that have helped me out to put this event on. I couldn't do it without them. Bruce put himself through Baldwin Park High School, or we affectionately call it Bum's Paradise High School, by taking photographs at the old San Gabriel drag strip. And he actually put himself through school doing that. And he has some photos that, Greg, I'd love you to see, of Don Garlitz at the 59 Fuel and Gas Championships. And, of course, the Hustler, Art Christmas car, and Tawny Ibo's car. So, I mean, it's really something. He's got hundreds of photographs. So anyway, Dennis Johnson and Evelyn. That jacket out front that we're going to raffle off, believe it or not, has 140,000 stitches in it. And he did it by hand. It took him 7 months and 16 hours. It is, well, you couldn't do it without a computer. So anyway, it's magnificent. Is that it? Yeah, we're going to raffle that off. And I might add that the little name tags and everything, Steve Shaw, where's Steve? Without Steve's help, I couldn't do any of this. He designed this logo, and I think it's just incredible. And I'll just tell you right now, if anyone here in the room would like one of these jackets, Dennis Johnson can make one available to you for $100, and that includes all the stitching and everything. So, a little commercial. Aren't they neat though? Okay, oh yes, and the clocks. These will also be raffled off. Yeah. So you can, J.R. Matson. Jack is Matson's Custom Radiators, but Jack was at the last event. And his dad is the fan man. You've seen the fans, the remote motor, that's pretty slick. Great for street rods. Ed Justice Jr. Ed and I go way back. His parents, his dad, his uncles. I can't tell you enough about his father. Really a great, wonderful man. And his uncle, Zeke Justice. Zeke and I became very close. And anyway, Ed has helped me out the last 2 events I did with his incredible illusions. Ed, it is absolutely mystifying. This man is the CEO of Justice Brothers, and they have in their own right a museum that's incredible with the race cars and everything. But he is one of the most gifted illusionists that you'll ever see. Ed?
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to make this quick and painless, because I look around the room. This is like being a traffic court for me. I recognize a lot of people. And this group has been in traffic court a few times, I know. All right. Earlier, I had JC Agajanian Jr., who our families actually have a lot of history. You may not know this. When my dad and my uncles went to Indianapolis in '46, JC came to Indy in what, 51? No, 48. 48? Okay. I don't remember the year, but anyway, it worked out that in 1952, after my dad and my uncles had won the Indianapolis 500 in 1950, in 1952, of course, their car won with Troy Ruttman, everybody's hero, and we got second with Jim Rathman with the Granatelli car we were sponsors of. But I always joke with the guys, I say there was a scoring discrepancy, but anyway. All right, JC, come on up. And How about Dick Guldstrand? You come on up here too. This is a real big budget show. 2 pieces of cardboard, a couple of marking pins, and a deck of cards.
Is this the Armenian table here?
Yeah, it is. You can buy anything you want at this table right here.
Including
All right,
watches?
right here in front, guys. Yeah, right here in front, JC. So take a piece of board, each of you. Take a stand out here in front, JC.
Okay.
Facing the audience, all right? This is called good stage management. All right. Now, I'm going to stand back here because I know it's hard to hear and it's a big crowd, and I know there might be a couple people that have hearing aids, and I know I'll be there someday too. Okay. All right. My wife, you know the old deal. Whoever controls the TV controller at home is really the power person, right?
Yeah.
Right? And I gave it up a few years ago, not realizing that, and I've been trying to get it back ever since. So anyway, JC, now earlier I had you picture a card, okay? And I told you to think of that and not to forget it.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
You still have that picture of that card in your mind?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead and write that on the board, but don't let anybody else see. Try to hold it close to your chest here. And Dick, you and I know each other, but we don't have anything set up, do we?
No.
No. We didn't talk earlier. I didn't slip you $10 to do what I wanted. Oh, no. No. If you got it, you don't remember it anyway, right? Yeah. All right. What I want you to do is I want you to write a number between 1 and 40. It could be 1 and 52, but we're going to end up counting cards, and 52 is a long time. Well, thank you very much. Okay, 1 and 4. Don't let anybody see it though. Yeah, turn this way. Okay.
Then he can't see it.
Ed Iskenderian's about ready to blow up here.
Call the police.
All kidding aside, my dad wore hearing aids too, and with the controller, I've always turning the volume up. My wife's like, God, can't you hear? And I go, well, yeah. I mean, I've been around cars all my life. Yeah, I do have a little hearing loss, but my dad, the challenge for him in his later years was finding a phone that rang loud enough that he could hear it. And because he'd be standing there on some of the phones, it'd be ringing, and they'd go, hey, I think your pocket's ringing, Ed. But anyway, all right, let's see. All right, Nick, you want to help me out with this?
Yes, sir.
All right, I've got a deck of cards here. Now, I could have you look at any card, okay? But I don't want you to pick the card. I want it to be a free choice, okay? You go ahead and say stop as we go through the cards. Right there. Take that card, look at it, remember it, okay? Put it back here. And now I'm going to cut the cards a few times, all right? Cutting them a few times. You tell me when to stop cutting them. I can go as long as you want. Right there? One more time or 2 more times? Right there, okay. So that's where you want it. We don't have any idea where that card that you looked at is in the deck. Okay, now, very careful. Dick, what was the number that you selected, free choice, that you wrote down on the card? Turn around, let's see it. Show it to the audience. Number 27, show it there. 27, free choice?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, I'm going to count off 27 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's why I didn't want 52.
Yeah.
Okay. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. What was the name of the card that you got, the free selection? The 8 of diamonds. And the free choice that you thought of earlier, what did you write
I wrote it down on Richard's card that he gave me when he walked in, and this is the number, and I can't believe you did that. I'm telling you the truth, you did that. Wow. Listen, I'm going to Vegas. I was wondering if you...
You can take these home with you, put them under your pillow,
You gotta sign it.
and tomorrow morning you won't believe what you'll find.
The next guy I would like to thank is Richard Parks. Richard I can't tell you how many hours Richard spent on the phone helping me with the guest list, the folks to come to this event. And hopefully there's no one that was left out. So I want to thank Richard, and of course Wally Parks, Richard's father, would be very proud of him because he spends literally all his waking hours compiling the history of hot rodding, the dry lakes, and so forth with the Society of Land Speed Racing Historians. And Jim Miller over there. Jim is also part of the Hot Rod Foundation, and he's scanned literally hundreds and hundreds of photographs. While I'm on that subject, Steve Shaw is another one. Steve does all my electronic editing, and same thing. Anyone we do a story on, we scan the vintage photos. So, and of course, Greg Sharp has probably the largest collection of photos in the world. So, and he's very free to lend them out. I've borrowed some. Another person I'd like to thank, Bill Guldstrand. Bill. No, seriously. A very gifted photographer, and his whole garage is lined with photographs. And he's also a car guy. Paul Stamrick. Paul has created this incredible piece of metal art. It's on and he spent God knows how many hours doing it. It's powder coated and has all the five guys' names on it. Isn't this beautiful? I mean, it's on a little turnstile, like a Lazy Susan. It's got all the five fellows' names, and it says, difference, 5 men, visions. And think about it, that's very true. Every one of these fellows were told way back when it wouldn't work. Anyway, if I may just set this table here. That's going to be donated to the museum, so hopefully there'll be a nice prominent place to display it. Anyway, the first individual is Anson Engineering, Louie Senter. And he went to Polytechnic High School, and he was a very gifted machinist, to such an extent that his parents bought him a lathe and a drill press and stuff in his garage, and went to school, and he was so high up in the class that there was a company, a tool machining company, that out of all the kids in the LA school system, he was selected to work for this company because of being his machining skills. And when the war started, they were trying to give him a deferment. Wouldn't let him go in the service. And he said, hell no, I'm going. And so he was a machinist mate in the Navy during the war. And when he got out of the service, he got a job at Eddie Miller Engineering. And of course, the history of that incredible company is all the people that worked there went on to greater things. Ed Pink was one of them, and so many fellows that went through that organization. And of course, Eddie Myers, Miller was a 3-time winner of Indianapolis. And you learned a lot there, didn't you, Louie? Then he started a little machine shop business, and one thing led to another. And Ed Iskenderian and Louie Senter, they've been friends for all these years, but they help one another. There's an ad in the first Hot Rod magazine, one above the other, Iskenderian cams with Ed, and above it was Anson Engineering. And he started out making wheels and things of that nature, fuel blocks, and one thing led to another. So anyway, I'd love very much for Ed Pink to come up. Ed Pink worked for Louie.
Thanks, Dick. Now, Louie Senter, what can you say? Louie and I, first time I met Louie was probably 1946. Some of the dates and things that I'll talk about with him may not be exactly accurate, but the content will be. When I first met Louie, I was a teenager, and he had Anson Automotive on Jefferson Boulevard. And he built me a Ford Flathead short block. And that was my first encounter with Louie. And I used it in a little coupe that I ran at El Mirage Dry Lake. I had to race at El Mirage because I wasn't old enough to have a driver's license to be driving on the street. So anyway, in later years, I worked for Louie when he moved on to Normandy Avenue, Anson Automotive, and Louie has done so many things in his life, from the dry lakes to Bonneville to midgets to sprint cars to Indy cars, whatever it was. And one of the great things about Louie is he was everybody's friend. And I remember that when he with Anson Automotive, somebody would come in to see Louie and they want to buy something. And if they had the money, he sold it. If he didn't have the money, he still sold it to them, even though they didn't have money. Sometimes they'd give him part of it down, and they'd pay the rest out later. Sometimes they never paid the rest out later. And things went on, and as I remember, his wife Betty was the one that did the books. And she's looking at the books, and she's noticing that they're really buying a lot of stuff. But when it gets down to what's left over, what they're making, there wasn't very much. So she devised a very, very good marketing plan. And this marketing plan was very unique. And what it was is, everything they sold, they'd get paid for it. That made sense. And then everything they sold, they needed to make a profit. So this was the new thing that got implemented into Anson. And all of a sudden, there was a bunch of people that were PO'd over this particular deal because their deal had changed. But the most important thing is, to keep Anson in business, you got to get paid for what you do, and you got to make a profit on what you do. So consequently, there were also people that were friends of Louie's, and they had parts that they wanted to sell. So they'd bring them into Louie, and they'd say, "Hey, Louie, can I leave these parts here and you'll sell for me?" And he says, "Yeah, no problem." Bring them in, and he'd sell them. Sometimes he'd get paid for them, and sometimes he wouldn't. But in the meantime, the guy that owned the parts would come back, and he maybe decided to change his mind. "I need my parts back." Well, the used parts he brought in were now no longer in existence, so the guy walked out with brand new parts. So that had to change, and that's one of the things that Betty implemented in there and got changed. And Louie was just everybody's friend. There were so many people throughout the late 40s, 50s, and 60s that went racing that Louie really sponsored, that he really didn't realize that he was sponsoring them. And he just, he and I had a lot of years together. We went racing together. He had a top fuel dragster that he and I ran together that he was gracious enough to let me run. And we spent a lot of times together at various races and functions and so forth. And then he had a daughter, Marcia, and I was very fortunate to watch Marcia grow up. And she ended up getting married to Rodney Scully, and they had a son, Shane. And lo and behold, as Shane grew up, what happens? Shane's going to go midget racing. Louie's right in the middle of it with Shane, getting him going, getting him straightened out, and make sure he goes down the right path. And I think that and Louie was also involved with SEMA, very much so, getting that thing going. And there isn't too many things in the automotive hot rod industry that Louie Senter didn't have a hand in, helping, guiding somebody going along the way. And I think that the best way that I can sum it up is I'm very proud to have been a friend of Louie's all these years. I think he and I have been friends for about 65 years. And he's really, I'd hate to think what this business would be like without Louie Senter. So anyway, congratulations, Louie, on a great, great career.
I'd like to ask Dave McClelland and Don Prudhomme to come up. I must tell you, I'm a big fan of McClelland's. You know, obviously he's the voice of the NHRA. Mic off? What happened? Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Anyway, you know, not only is Dave the voice of NHRA, but he's a racer. Now, how big of a fan am I of Dave McClelland's? Let me just show you. See this T-shirt? Now, what I want to know is, how did this thing get the name? You got to confide.
You got to stop by and look at it at least. It's the deep maroon Fiat out there that is an altered car that I acquired in 1970. It had been built in 61 and 62 by a group known as Shreve Automotive down in Louisiana. I got it in 70. I changed jobs quite frequently for about 18 months. And it ended up coming from South Louisiana, the New Orleans area, through Dallas to California in less than a year and a half. When I got to California, I had some modifications done to it. I put a big block and a clutch flight in it, and raced it at Irwindale and all that. Somewhere in the early 70s, I was working at the time full-time for NHRA. And we had a staff meeting, and Wally was an exceptional man to work for. But at this staff meeting, Wally was somewhat upset. And Wally kind of got on everybody there and said, "You're not working in a tuna factory, you're working for the leading drag racing association in the world." By the next day, I won't name the people involved, but there were tuna tank t-shirts, there were all kinds of things circulated, and it ended up being the name that was put on the race car, the tuna tank. It has absolutely nothing to do with fish. It's totally related to the story I just told you about Wally and his description that it was not a tuna factory at NHRA. So that's the explanation on it.
People now know.
Yeah, right. Now, I know you paid your money and you came to hear that burning issue discussed, I've got to tell you. But it is such a joy to be here today. I've had the pleasure of knowing most of the individuals we're honoring tonight personally. And it is also very nice to be able to say that I'm probably one of the youngest guys that will be at the podium, except for the snake behind me tonight. But that's also quite good too, because this is the time that we have the opportunity to recognize and honor folks that have contributed so much to not only the industry, but to the sport we love. Dick had made mention earlier, you could practically build a car out of the products presented by this, and I kind of ran through it. Well, the only thing that I can see is missing is tires, but we could always con a set of those. And then the other thing it is missing is a chassis builder. But I thought to myself, if you put all 5 of these guys together, somebody has got the talent, the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to build a race car chassis. Everything else is covered between Arias with cylinder heads and blocks, Iskenderian with the cam, Carrillo with rods that don't break. I mean, just go on through the list. Louie Senter, practically an entire car by himself. So with that, you could easily put a car on the racetrack just from these 5 guys. And what a contribution they've made over the years to the racing world, which is highlighted by the career of our next guest, Don the Snake Prudhomme.
Yeah, I was on my way coming down here. I thought, man, these guys that we're going to see are the guys that you know, you don't get to see that much these days. Eske, you know, Hilborn, Louie Senter, Carrillo, guys like that that really started the industry. And I didn't quite get to know the guys that well because I wasn't. I was a driver and mainly driving for Keith Black, who a lot of you know. And so I wasn't like hands-on with Iskenderian until later on when I got to know him. But he was like this huge guy to me, you know. Iskenderian, I mean, here's Eske and Louie Senter, and Art Crispin. Those guys are just way above my head. But I was, thanks to you guys and gals, I was one of the guys that carried on until a couple of years ago in the sport of drag racing. But I started, I guess I was one of the first guys to start making a couple of bucks in the sport, until I got hooked up with Ed Pink and he started sending me those bills and it was over. And if you ever got a bill from Ed Pink, and it comes in the mail, it's pink in color, and he could add really good. I worked out of the back of Ed's shop, and he really got me on the map. You know, he really built some great engines, along with Keith Black that I drove for, and then went to Ed's. And in today's world, we're the best of buddies, and these really are the good times for me that I'm around now to enjoy myself, hanging out with all you guys. But I just want to tell you, I don't have a lot to say except for just thanks for everything you folks have done for the sport of drag racing and racing period. And too bad still Stu Hilborn's not here. I'd sure love to have seen him. So thanks.
Thank you, Don. I realized after I talked about building the car that I left out a method of this fuel distribution. And needless to say, I mean, he set the world on its ear back in 1947 to 49 when he debuted the mechanical fuel injection system, and Stuart Hilborn would have played a dramatic role in the building of that car. One more item I want to, you know, he who has the microphone has the power. I just would like to extend an invitation to any and all. On July the 14th, Ed Iskenderian is celebrating his 91st birthday. Okay? Now, I am not a walking compendium of the knowledge of Ed Iskenderian, except I emceed his 90th birthday party, and it's going to be held at the same time, same place, which is LTR Racing Engines up in the valley where Lake Isabella is, out of Lake Isabella in the Onyx and Canebrake area. You'll find LTR Racing Engines and Lanny and the family putting on yet another great birthday party for Iske. Join us if you can. Dick?
It's my honor to announce to the group that Nick Arias Jr. has been inducted in the SEMA Hall of Fame. Ed Iskenderian being the first president of SEMA, and Louie also in the Hall of Fame, and naturally Ed is in the Hall of Fame. Stu is in the Hall of Fame. I wrote a story on Nick for Rotten Custom, and I was kind of surprised when I found out he wasn't inducted, so I set out to do what I could and submitted nomination, and by golly, you're in the Hall of Fame. So, makes me feel really good. Nick, you know, like a lot of kids that were born during the Depression, before it and during it, lived through it, Nick went to Polytechnic High School in LA. In fact, you went there too, didn't you?
Yeah.
And Nick did very well in school. He was interested in engines and engines only. And he basically built his life around engines. But I remember standing with Nick years ago at the State Line Casino in Wendover. And I'm just a low buck competitor at Bonneville. But I listened to him talk about engines, and I was totally fascinated by his knowledge. And basically, everything about an engine this man knows, and it's just impressive to me. But anyway, like a lot of kids, he was a racer. He went to Bonneville. Kenny Bigelow was his friend, and he ran a Wayne-head Chevy engine in it. And then, like a lot of kids, Nick went to Korea during the Korean War, and he found out that Kenny was killed in El Mirage, and he got some money together so they could send some money to Kenny's mom and buy the 37 Chevy Coupe. So when they got back from Korea, he and his friends started trying to rebuild this car, and they realized it's pretty well gone. But the engine, they went, and Nick went to Wayne Horning and got to know the man enough that he was impressed with Nick's background and hired him to work for him. Right next to Horning was Bonola Pistons, and he got to know Frank Bonola pretty well. So between the two companies, he got to know the two enough to learn about the head business and learn about the cam business. And he and Joe Pisano started Bonola Pistons. But there was a lot of competition. Ford Street was one of them, and so on. So it got to the point where Nick couldn't support a growing family, and he left, and he started working for Yeaco Cadillac, building, you know, as a tune-up guy there, and at night he was building motors. So this fellow was putting in 18-hour days. Anyway, well, long story short, he decided to get back in the piston business. There was some, you know, stopgaps in between, and he talked to Louie Senter one day, and Louie wasn't really happy with the quality of the pistons that he was involved with. And Nick had saved money and put it aside, very frugal in that regard. And he said to Louie, well, sell the business to me. And in turn, he did. Louie was going to Indy. And when he came back, he sold the business to Nick. And the rest is history. Nick also, at one time, had talked to the guys at Bonola about doing hemispherical heads for Chevrolet, big blocks, because the Chrysler guys were whooping the Chevy guys, and they said, gee, if we had hemispherical heads, we could beat the Chrysler guys. And the guys at Bonola weren't interested, but Nick pursued that, and his Arias hemispherical heads are used all over the world. I mean, big thing. So anyway, Nick, it means a lot to me to talk about these guys because so much behind what they do. I know Nick, your son Nick III, he's done an awful lot, taken over, and the company's still family owned and they still do very well. So unfortunately, that's about all. I didn't mean it like that. I have a tendency to, anyway, I didn't mean it like that, Nick. I really didn't. Gosh, you know, when you think about it, these fellows, Ed and Nick get together every day for lunch at the burger joint in Gardena. And just think of the knowledge that these fellows have. I mean, you couldn't sit at the table without coming away learning something, you know. It's a fact of life. So anyway.
They're usually talking politics.
Jack Sparks, are you here, Jack?
Yep.
Jack's dad was Art Sparks, who owned Fort's True Pistons, but Jack worked for,
Really, I feel a bit humbled following some of these notable folks here. And you can all be thankful that before I got up, I broke my glasses, so I can't read.
Microphone.
I'm sorry. Better?
No, the mic's
Now? Okay. Good. Well, Dick had wrote an article on Fred in the Rodder magazine back in, I think, 2006 or something that outlines what I consider to be a pretty colorful background. And my association with Fred was after these antics. Most of you know Fred's history as far as Bonneville and Indianapolis, and he got into the rod business in the early 60s, and I got to know him shortly thereafter. My association, as was pointed out, was through my mom and dad. Mom and dad, dad of course owned Forge True. Fred started Carrillo again in the early 60s, and through the years in racing they got to be very good and close friends. I know mom and dad both considered Fred virtually family. He'd come and visit them. They lived in Tahoe at the time. Dad had retired up there, and Fred would come and visit, and I lived in Tahoe as well, and the association, I listened to the stories and the bench racing that went on and was really impressed. And on one of the visits, Fred casually mentioned to me that, why don't you come and look at my business? And I had absolutely no intention. I had been in the racing business, as you can imagine, the motorsport stuff with my dad. As many youngsters do, you're raised in a business, whatever it is, and of course, many not as glorious as the motorsport business, but the last thing you want to do at 20 or 21 years old is see another piston or run another lathe. I was pretty fed up with it. Got out of it for a number of years, and then introduced to Fred. And I came down and visited him one day, and it was truly a visit. And I'm not sure who instigated the whole thing. I'll never know whether my father was involved in it or not, because Fred never admitted anything. But I got in the car with Fred and traveled around, and we went and saw purveyors for a day. At the end of the day, he asked me if I was going to be there the next morning. And that's how my association started with Fred. I worked for him for 21 years. It was a pretty good deal. It was a really good deal. Fred was a bit of a taskmaster. He had a great deal of knowledge. He would task you to learn that, not by him explaining it to you. He'd lead you down the garden path and then figured you ought to learn it by yourself, and that was the way that it was going to stick in your mind. I started working in the machine shop. I worked every machine for a little over a year. I didn't think it was very productive, but it turned out to be one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned. He taught me how to make connecting rods. I had the capability of running machines, but I didn't know how to make connecting rods. All these things that built the foundation for my association with Fred justified what I would consider to be one of the most successful, enviable positions in the motorsport. I was always very proud. We did no advertising. Some of you gave little away, at least what Fred might have given some things away, but he sort of let us. But we go to trade shows. I'd go to a trade show. Fred would go for fun, but I'd go to a trade show and sit in front of a competitor's booth. Best advertising we ever got was the words that would come out. Was it as good as Carrillo? Was it, can you do what Carrillo can do? I mean, that was our advertising. We didn't put a penny in print until shortly after Fred sold the business. It was an enviable position to be in, and I was very proud and still extremely proud to be associated with Carrillo Industries as an entity. That's where my association goes. Once again, most of Fred's colorful past is documented in some of the periodicals and some of the bench racing stories that I heard, of course, but didn't participate. But as an employer and a director, as I said, to this day, Carrillo maintains a position in the industry that was established by Fred. Fred possesses a racer mentality. which may have cost a number of you people money that are in the racing business, because the racer mentality is to make a $20 part and sell it for $10 because it's the best you can do. Most of us in this business have, with the idea of the fact that if you stand behind the quality of the part and you're proud, maintain the passion that this industry requires, which unfortunately we're seeing on the wane. But of course, these 5 individuals represented it. So this is a business of passion, and you have to be very proud of the part that goes out the front door. And Fred instilled that in me, and it's stuck with me, and it's probably the best asset I ever got out of it. And thank you, Fred. Thanks for a lot of good years.
The thing about Fred, yeah, I wrote the story in the Rogers Journal about Fred, but I got to go to his home and I got to know him just like I know everybody. He's built a go-kart motor, tried like crazy to market it. It didn't quite work, but he was in Monrovia and he's like everyone else. He was a good machinist. And the thing was, even before, he went to Hollywood High School because 2 of the other high schools didn't want any part of him. He kept street racing in front of the school. They finally said, we don't want you here. And he finally ended up at Hollywood High. But his mom was a single parent, and Fred, like a lot of kids, he built a hot rod out of junkyard parts. And, you know, after the war, he started racing a pretty radical car. It was a rear-engine roadster, and he went to the first Bonneville, and that was quite the thing. What'd you do, 170, Fred, something like that? Yeah, but, you know, he was just, like most guys, an innovator. Like most hot rodders in those days, Stu and Nick and everybody, they didn't go by what people said wouldn't work. They said, no, it can work, and I'm gonna do it. Actually, Fred came up with a first concept of a narrowed rear end and this incredible streamliner that he built for Bonneville. And it was like nothing anyone had ever seen before, and there's a photograph in that story. Unfortunately, he was given the wrong information from Firestone. He had Firestone Indy tires on it, and he wanted to do, and the plan was to do 300, right, Fred? And unfortunately, about 270, the wheel exploded. Magnesium wheel, because the Firestone engineers told it to blow it up to 90 pounds, and that didn't work. And when it exploded, Fred's leg went out from the bottom of the streamliner, and it was badly crushed and broken. But it took a long time before they finally took his leg off. But the thing is, Fred is the kind of guy, like everyone else, that took on something that most people thought wouldn't work, and it did work. And Bruce McLaren and Dan Gurney and everybody used his connecting rods religiously. So I'm proud to have you here, Fred. And when I did the first deal for Ack, you know, Fred was Ack Miller's best man in his wedding. So, and he got to see Ack, and only a few months later, Ack passed away. But it was nice to have these 5 guys here. Hilborn fuel injection. Wow. You know, there's another guy, Stu. He was I don't know if he was formerly a chemist, but he knew chemistry. And during the war, he kept thinking in his mind that he'd like to develop a fuel injection unit. And of course, the Germans did it. And during the Second World War, the Messerschmitts were pretty incredible aircraft, fighter aircraft, because they were fuel injected. But Stu had a different idea. He got to know Eddie Miller. Eddie Miller, the great Indianapolis Duesenberg driver, was his neighbor. And Eddie Miller kind of took him under his wing. And his theory in fuel distribution was, instead of having 3 carburetors at the center of a flathead, have one over each port. That made sense. And Eddie made an intake manifold for that. But still, in the back of Stu's mind, fuel injection was something he wanted to develop. But it took him a couple of years, because when he started out, like most kids, he didn't have any money, had a hacksaw and a drill, and that's about all. So it took him a couple of years to develop this fuel injection. And believe it or not, it doesn't look much different today than it did in 1948. when he debuted that at the first hot rod show put on by SETA. And people would walk by and they how does that work? Well, it's constant fuel injection. Well, that won't work. Why won't it? Why should an engine sit idle for 44 times a second, right? Or 44 times, not doing anything. We're going racing. We're not going to Bob's Big Boy, you know. So, by God, if it didn't work, and people started using it, Meyer Brake tested it, and they thought the world of it. It was 109 horsepower, I think, out of that Offie with the fuel injection. Guys at Indy would qualify with it, but they're a little gun shy. But the guy that really used the Hilborn fuel injection was Volkovich, and he lapped the whole field when he won with a fuel-injected engine with Hilborn fuel injection. And that to me is something. Dick Guldstrand, come up here, Dick. I'll tell you something about Guldstrand. He's an old Corvette guy. I used to race Corvettes, and he held the lap record down the Mulsanne Straight, 100, what, almost 200, was it? Close. Imagine that. Here's a kid that, you know, the hay bales at Santa Barbara, and you're going to run me off? I can't even tell you about it.
It's getting embarrassing.
No, but this guy would, you know, we used to race at Palm Springs and Santa Barbara, and that was an airport course. You lose it and you take out a snow fence and a hay mill. But at Le Mans, at night, in a Corvette, with Ferraris blowing by and the prototypes and stuff, that was something. Dry Lakes guy.
I kind of wasn't ready for this, but looking at the faces around this room, I think I've worked for most of them. I know I worked for Ed on a dirt floor with his first cam machine, and Ed Iskenderian, God love you, helped me all through the years with all kinds of parts and engines and so forth. And Louie Senter, I worked for Louie on a dirt floor over off of Jefferson Boulevard, and did heads and cams for him. And Louie tells a story about when I was driving, well, I had to drive everything to make a living. I drove NASCAR, and I drove sprint cars, and I drove midgets, and I drove Can-Am and Trans Am. And Louie had an idea that he wanted to run an Indy car, and I helped him get some sponsorship, and we put this Indy car together. It was a mid-engine Offie, turbocharged, and I thought, boy, what a chance. And we tried a couple of tracks, didn't do real well. And then we went to Indy, and we couldn't qualify. It just wasn't fast enough, and I may not have been the right guy in it, but boy, I sure tried my heart out. So we went to Atlanta to see how it would go there, and I got, somehow it got up in the air, way up in the air, and went end for end down into the infield, and nobody wanted to rush over. They were going to fill the hole up. They wouldn't want to take me out of it. And so Louie calls me up. He said, thank goodness, Guldstrand. He says, you've just saved me a lot of money. You got me out of the Indy business. So, well, I was paralyzed for a while, and thank God I recovered that. But the relationship of all the people in here that make all of this business, the incredible thing that it's become. There was nothing going on back in the 40s and 50s other than production automobiles. And all of a sudden you had these guys building parts that you could put on your car. And it was now a national phenomenon. And the hot rod thing got bigger and bigger and bigger, and these names became bigger and bigger. And I could not believe that I had known and worked for all of these guys at one time or another. And they were true geniuses. They were the guys that were passionate about what they were doing. They spent every waking moment doing what they loved and training people. There was no question that they would help you if you wanted to know something, if you wanted to develop something, they would help you right away. And I am so incredibly proud to be here with this group today. I can't tell you, I wish I'd contributed more, but my life was racing, and I had to go racing, and I was Roger Penske's first professional driver, if you can believe that. And so it went on to having a lot of fun. And if anybody ever decides to get involved, please use the passionate side of your body, because it is all passion. It had nothing to do with money initially. It was all passion and enthusiasm and talent. And I want to thank you all so very much for having me here.
No, I was hoping, I realized that the story I did on Dick, I did 11 years ago for Rodney Custom, for Iskey. And I was hoping maybe John Athens might be here. But when Iskey first started out, he had a little machine shop going, and it was at John Athens. He was a tool maker, wasn't he, Ed? And he had this little machine shop going at John Athens' place. Now, he went in the service. This is what I had a good time with, because I'll never forget this conversation. Ed, because he was a mechanically inclined and, of course, a racer at El Mirage, and he went to El Mirage one time, and there was no room for him. Well, what am I going to do? Well, you can ride in the race car in the back. We'll tow you up with a chain. That's how actually Ack Miller went up to Muroc. He was towed up with a chain by his brother Zeke. Anyway, they told Ed, well, make sure you don't fall asleep, because there was no floor in it. So if you fall asleep, your feet will fall down, and you'll be pulled out and killed. And Johnny Jumpkins was the race car, huh, Ed? So that was his first touch of Muroc, and he wasn't driving, and he was just trying to learn from these guys. Bungholers was the name of the club. You kind of assume why that was all about. So anyway, Ed comes back from the service, and I got to tell you about his flight training. He wanted to be a pilot. And all his friends were, because, in the Air Force, the Air Corps, that was called in those days. So he had a little Piper Club. That's where he was going to take his training flight and initial flight to get his training. And the instructor was sitting behind him, yelling at him, and Ed was getting nauseated and dizzy, and he finally let go of the stick. And the flight instructor, that's it, now you've got it. And he was going around this square pattern over this field, and of course I don't think the Air Corps finally looked at it. I don't think you're going to be a pilot, but he became a steward in the Air Corps, flying over in the South Pacific. Now imagine they'd fly in the cargo planes, and he was in there like a steward. Coffee, ma'am, or sir, madam, whatever you do. And he found out, gee, they didn't have needle and thread, and their socks needed darned and everything. So he was like an Artemis Gordon. He'd have them open up the thing. There was the needle, thread, socks, whatever those guys needed. And by golly, when the war ended, he got out of the service. He had a lot of money, because he saved his money. Well, now he's got to go racing, El Mirage. And he wanted to get a campground. So Clay Smith, he was busy racing. Where's Vicki Smith? Vicki? There's Vicki Smith, Clay Smith's daughter. And gosh, it'd take 3 months to get a cam. And Ed goes, well, it's pretty complicated, but if I put my mind to it and do nothing else, maybe I could learn to grind a cam. And he did. He ground these cams, and of course Louie Senter had Anson Engineering and everything. Well, nobody wanted anything to do with them because they were noisy, the loaf of bread. Right. But the guys in NASCAR, boy, those things would come out of a corner and really had a lot of torque. Those guys liked those cams. They didn't care if they were noisy. And he started peddling his cams in the South. One thing led to another, and the rest is history. So there's a good example. How many cam grinders in those days? Well, my God, there were more cam grinders than the man in the moon. But here's Ed Iskenderian racing cams, still going strong, like Hilborn, like Arias, Carrillo. That says something about their thought, their passion, the fact that those companies are still thriving today. And I'm really proud to have done this. And now, we're done.
That's
story about the stolen parts? Yeah. Chuck Watman was a lot of fun to always talk to, and we used to send our blowers to him to have them loosened up. And we found out later the guys wanted them tightened up. We didn't know that. But Potman's idea was, I think, in case it backfires, it won't hurt the blower so much if you got a lot of clearance. So one day a man came from the harbor. He said during the weekend someone stole all the blowers, 671 blowers off my diesel engines out there. He used to drive by and see those. So I said, well, probably someone bought them to steal them, to sell them, I guess. So let's call Pop and maybe he'll hear about this. Hi, Chuck. Fella had a bunch of blowers stolen and they're all painted green. You haven't heard anything about them? And he hesitated a minute and he says, they're here. he had bought them off the guy.
Hello, I'm Ed Justice Jr. with JC Agajanian Jr., 2 juniors here.
2 juniors and a senior.
Right, and we're with Ed Iskenderian, the cam father, the father of the 5-cycle engine, and so many other things. I grew up reading the ads. Ed's a longtime friend, knew my dad and my uncles, and of course, JC Sr. And Ed, special day today, right?
Yes, it is a special day, yeah. We got 5 I'm one of the 5 celebrities, I guess.
Well, you know, you're going to be turning 91, Ed, and that's just unbelievable. Any of us that know you, I mean, you're in great shape. What do you attribute that to?
I think maybe it helped to be athletic when I was a kid playing on the acting bar and the rings. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. And my teacher in school used to talk about health and eating the right foods and stuff. Well, I guess that's it. I am smoking cigars only. That's the only bad thing I'm doing, I think.
Yeah, you do. You smoke quite a few cigars. When did that start?
Well, that started when I used to answer the phone and get a little nervous. And I found that at lunch, if I tried one of those cigars, it would calm me down. I didn't want to start drinking, so I just started drinking those cigars, and they did calm me down.
So you're different than, see, the kids today, they don't want anything to calm them down. They drink energy drink to keep them hyped up. They're different today. They don't want to be calm. You were the opposite. You're a different generation for sure.
Yeah. Oh, but by the way, they'd order, it was $3 for a phone call from New York to Los Angeles. So they'd have me relay messages for Pistons and things over here. And sometimes I'd have 2 or 3 of those to do. And I didn't get them done because the phone I was answering, that's what made me nervous, yeah.
Ed, they taught, Louie Senter and Ed both, a couple of his early mechanics talked about working on a dirt floor. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And was there a problem? Because you were doing precision machining. The machines were on dirt. Did you have trouble holding tolerances?
Well, they didn't have to buy grinding powder, right? You just used the dirt off the floor.
Oh, that happened to be behind Mercury Tool and Die. That happened to be a dirt floor too, yeah. Well, a lot of these guys would be sneak-on additions, and there would be no paving on the ignitions, you know. So, but yeah, we got by all right on dirt floors, yeah.
You know, they had a banquet for Jim Hall before the Long Beach Grand Prix, the Road Racing Drivers Club, to honor him. Oh, yeah. And you know, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how many different things you've been involved with. You supplied cams to Hall Franz Weiss for that, the Yellow Submarine, the Indy car back then, right?
Yeah, that was the Cosworth. Yeah. And yeah, they needed, so they tried out some little longer duration cams for the Cosworth, and I guess they worked all right. And that was with Rutherford won that year. Yeah, and we had cams in that car. 1980, I think it was.
Just about then.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, cam grinding, you know, you're obviously old school. You, you have Ed Winfield's cam grinding machine? Is
At his estate, I did buy his original cam grinding machine. Yeah. And I bought my first cam from Ed Winfield, and he was our mentor, you know, and we looked up to him and George Riley and some of these famous guys. When we were kids, you know, we never realized that maybe we'd be, well, maybe later on we'll be kind of like mentors to the newer kids coming along.
Yeah, and he is.
But we learned from those older fellas, and
Yeah, George Riley, Ed Winfield, though, were really like the real pioneers of the cam grinding, right? And the speed stuff.
and speed equipment, yeah.
And then you guys came along and you took it further. But now we go back, you have that cam grinding machine that was Ed Winfield's, which is really a cool piece of history.
Yeah.
I mean, because of your knowledge and your experience, I mean, do you still grind cams the same way, or is there a lot of computers? I don't think you use any computers. You've got it all here on what you do. I mean, help me out on that.
Well, we do use a computer now.
Okay.
Makes it easier. But here was a funny thing. My son wanted to buy this particular computer about 20-some years ago, and it was $4,500, made in Santa Monica, California. And we bought it, and it was hard work using that because there's a better way much later. But I went to a bid at Downey Aircraft Company, and here were some computers looked like the ones that we bought for $4,500. So I bid $7 a piece on them, and the first thing you know, I got the bid, and I got them. I brought them home. I said, "Look, these look like the ones you paid $4,500 for." He says, "Yeah, the serial number is even later on this one. I'll take this one home." And those had become obsolete in a few years, and better ones were coming, you see. From $4,500 to $7, that's about, it went down that low in value because there are new ways, new technology had come out.
So did you use those for parts, or were you able to get the computers up and running and use them?
We don't use it for an adding machine now, but we got a better one.
Yeah. Now, cam grinding, coming up with a cam is an art. But once you grind the cam and you sell it to somebody, there's no secret. You can look at the cam, you can measure it, you could copy it, right? So how did you guys, I mean, here you are, you're in a business and you build a big name, Ed. I mean, you're a legend in this business. How did you build a legendary name when if you did something, somebody could copy it and be making the cam the next day?
You can get into the cam grinding business by just copying what's on the market and do pretty well. But what I did is I lucked out because I was willing to try some crazy things, stuff that might not work or be against grain, you know. And in NASCAR, they were running flatheads, and I happened to make this practice cam with no clearance ramp and really slappy action. It was noisy, and it would slap the valve open, and the timing was short, so the mid-range power was good, and yet the top end was good, because the other cams they made were soft action cams, good for the top end only, and a little mushy in the mid-range. So that's how I got in with NASCAR, and that was accidental. I didn't know they were going to be running flatheads and getting big like they did in NASCAR. Well, it was all flatheads to begin with.
And I'll tell you what, those NASCAR boys love the torque coming out of the turn. They love those cams, and they were noisy, and they didn't care. They slapped the bells. They'd slap them open. It wouldn't matter. They loved the power that you gave them.
Yeah, now that, like you said, that was in the beginning. My family was living in the South at that time when they became the first sponsors in NASCAR. And a guy you definitely had to work with, who was a good friend of my dad, my Uncle Zeke, Red Vote.
Oh, yeah. You know, I never got to meet Ned Vogt. I admired him, and I used to hear about him. And one day, when I used to be across from Edelbrock's, he says, "Ed Vogt was here yesterday, and I told him you were across the street." And he went over to see, and the door was locked. Oh, I was sick about that. I says, the salesmen were bothering me over and over that day, and I locked the door on the wrong day. And because he was very famous and smart, yeah. Yeah, he won a big race, and they caught him on this Buick V8. He had shortened the push rods. Well, that you can't get, yeah, that was crazy, wasn't it? Shortened the push rods so the lifters, hydraulic lifters, could not pump up. That was the reason he did that.
Well, Smokey said he was the original master mechanic in NASCAR. And, of course, Smokey would know.
Yeah.
And you worked with Smokey, didn't you?
Yeah, I worked with Smokey, and one day I went to visit him in Daytona Beach, and he was working with Ford then. He says, he didn't ask me how to get more horsepower. He says, how do you get the engine to use more fuel? And I thought for a minute, I said, well, you could richen it up a bit, but wait a minute. If it didn't like it, it would slow down and wouldn't draw as much fuel. The only way you can get the engine to use more fuel is to get it to use more air. So you got to have the air with it, you know, and that takes breathing, volumetric efficiency, which we learned from Ed Winfield, yeah.
And, of course, that's what a supercharger's all about, isn't it?
That's right.
Pumping more air into the motor that it necessarily doesn't really want. And we were talking about Smokey Unick, JC.
Yeah, well, you know what? Now, this isn't a technical question, but you are known as the Cam Father, and understandably so. Where'd that come from?
Well, Pete Millar, the drag racing cartoonist, who was a drag racer himself, he had the new picture of The Godfather had come out. And he thought, I think we'll do some cartoons about you and The Godfather. And I says, Godfather? Why don't you make it Cam Father? He says,
so
yeah,
you
yeah.
came up with it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of it unless he'd said Godfather, and I thought Cam Father.
Perfect.
Somehow that worked out, yeah.
Well, all these years later, it stuck with you. Ed, great talking to you, and it was great for you to be one of the 5 guys honored here. Of course, Stu Hilborn, Fred Carrillo, whose real name is Fred Carrillo, but nobody ever calls him by that, Louie Senter, and Nick Arias, your lunch buddy.
That's right.
You and Nick have lunch all the time at the burger stand down there in Gardena. So anyway, well, great.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, so now here we've got Ed Iskenderian, who we've been talking to, and of course JC Agajanian Jr., myself, Ed Justice Jr. Now we've got Louie Senter. Anson, he's had other companies that had Senter in the name, but Anson, most people didn't realize, was the put together of Jack Andrews and Louie Senter, and from Andrews and Anson. And you know, when I was growing up, Louie, of course I've known you forever, but there was a point in time at the drags that every car had a set of Anson wheels and an Anson decal on it. It was like Iskey. I mean, there were, you know, Iskenderian Cam T-shirt, Anson T-shirt, Moon Eyes T-shirt, a B&M Transmissions T-shirt. I mean, these were all the names that my generation we grew up with. We went to the A.J. Foyt auction. I tell you a funny story about Louie.
Yeah.
We go to the Foyt auction. A.J.'s got all this stuff up there. He's got the midget that my dad restored for him, the Hollywood Spring and Axle car, in fact. Yep. And so Louie buys a lot of stuff. Louie's always buying stuff. He's always selling stuff. We didn't end up buying anything that day. We almost bought an 18-wheeler. Remember, the 18-wheeler went real cheap. And so Louie has all this stuff that he's bought, and it comes time to pay for it, and he says, hey, I can't pay for this stuff, because if Betty finds out, and Betty is his wife, and you know where I'm going with this, Ed, right? If Betty finds out, I'll be in the doghouse for the next, 10 years. So he said to my dad, he says, Ed, you pay for this stuff, and then I'll pick it up in about a month and give you the money. And I'll work it out where Betty doesn't find out about it. And we said, okay, great. So we buy the stuff. We get the certificate that says we buy it and all that. There's no record of Louie Senter buying anything at the Foyt auction. But he bought a couple motors, and I forget what else, wheels, and God, I mean, we came home with a whole bunch of stuff that they shipped back. Yeah. One of them, so it goes about a month later, and my dad says, because we got the museum, hey, Louie, I'd like to keep that V6 motor, the Indy V6 motor. You go, okay, great, you keep that. But Louie says, I want that 4-cam Ford motor. He says, I've got that sold. Okay, so here, pay us for it. So he takes the 4-cam Ford motor. Betty never finds out about this. Yeah. You sell it to Bob Pettisotti, who puts it into a dirt car that Buzz Shoemaker restored. Right. We end up buying that dirt car. We get the motor back.
Oh, right. He ended up getting the motor back.
Everything you got.
See, it's a small world.
So this guy, you know, when you go with him to buy something, though,
It's exciting.
it's an experience because.
Well, we'd go to these auctions. We wouldn't know what we was buying, but we'd buy anything.
Well, I remember hearing stories, and there was a book written recently, and your brother Chris probably told you, he bought a copy. I got it from Jeff Haywood. Yeah, gave me a copy of it, and it's about early LA history and all that, and it's the most accurate telling of the story of your dad going to Indianapolis, the whole thing. And Chris said, yeah, that's the story. And I said, well, that's the story I was told by my dad and my uncles when your dad came to Indy, and they said, hey, here's another guy from the coast and all that. And of course, you know, the driver your dad had, Troy Ruttman, was the hero for so many people. Dan Gurney, for an example, idolized Troy Ruttman. Troy was just you know, considered to be really the top of the you know, pyramid. And I know Dan and Troy traveled together over in Europe there for a while, and he was really quite something. And the youngest winner, is he still the youngest winner, or did what do you call it, beat him? I think the one kid did.
Yeah, you did. Still like going fishing there? He's second youngest right now, but for many, up until a couple years ago, Troy was the youngest winner, and went back in 1952 and won the deal. But I'll tell you, JC was one of the guys that wouldn't mind putting a young driver in a good car, and Aggie always had the best equipment. He
always did.
Yeah. And a lot of car owners wouldn't put a driver, an untested driver, a young guy, in a good piece of equipment because they didn't want to take a chance on their equipment. But Aggie was real good about seeing talent, recognizing talent, and giving a guy a chance. And later on in years, after Troy won, there was a very young Parnelli Jones that he got put into a great piece of equipment, went back to Indy, was Rookie of the Year in that number 98 car, and then won the 500 for Aggie's second win. So it paid off, and I think the reason, Louie, and I don't know if my dad wanted to be a race driver. He promised his father that he wouldn't race cars, even though he snuck off and did race a little bit. But an Armenian promise to his father is a strong promise. So
he made a promise to him.
He made a promise to his dad because his dad was worried about him. And racing cars, you guys, was not a real high, being a doctor and a lawyer, that's one thing. But being a race driver, the dads didn't want that to happen. They were scared.
No, being a race driver back then was lower than being a motorcycle gang member today. Just seriously, people don't understand that. It was just not highly looked upon, and it wasn't a way to make a living.
No.
I mean, let's face it, most of the guys that were your contemporaries and that we grew up with, they didn't make money driving race cars.
No, never.
Never.
Driving race cars, you gotta love it. It was a hobby.
Yep.
And that's the way. In fact, in my shop, they used to come down my shop. I used to sponsor half the guys over there.
Willingly or unwillingly, they would get the part. You'd be a sponsor, all right.
Like Chet Miller, who was one of the Novi drivers, he ran an upholstery shop in Glendale, and that's what he was, an upholsterer. But it come Indy, they go back for the month and be a race car driver.
Yep. So Ed, I think that's the reason that Aggie was so good about recognizing talent, because in his heart, he was a racer. He was a racer first and a promoter and car owner second, and I think that's why he gave these young guys a chance in the good equipment where other car owners wouldn't.
Right. Well, it was a different era back then, totally.
Aggie was very, very good to the industry.
Now, you guys, they mentioned while we were here today that you guys, and I've got an original copy of Hot Rod Magazine, that you had an ad in the original copy of Hot Rod Magazine. So Bob Peterson, here he is, this young guy. He comes out of the movie industry. He's got this idea to do a magazine. It wasn't the first. There was Speed Age and other magazines that had been around, Motorsport from Europe. And but I mean, do you remember who sold you that ad? Was it Vic Edelbrock that says, "Hey, I'm going to run an ad," or did you actually get called on by Bob Peterson?
Bob Peterson used to hang out in my shop. Bob Peterson used to come down, use my telephone, didn't cost no money. He could sell ads for the magazine.
Oh, he'd use your phone to sell ads.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you still have your dad's golden toothpick that was given to him by Evel Knievel?
I do indeed, yes.
Because your dad was giving him so much of the gate, a percentage of the gate, and he had a man counting out there, and your dad was honest. He gave him the exact amount, so he gave your dad that golden toothpick.
That's right.
That's an accurate story too,
Yeah,
because
it is.
Evil, unbeknownst to your dad, had a guy checking the gate.
With a clicker
That's
on all
right.
3 gates.
Yeah, well, see, why? Because Evil had already learned the promoter routine. Yeah, you know, we only had 500 people here tonight, and the place is sold out, you know?
Sure, and in fact, Evil came to pick up his pay the next day after that big event. The first time it was on Wide World of Sports, and it was the first time that he jumped professionally and nationally on television. And Aggie was on the phone to USAC, and he threw the envelope that my brother Kerry had given him from out of the box office, and he gave it to Evil, and he looked through it, and he counted it, and he threw it back across the desk at Aggie and said, "This isn't right." And Aggie said, "What do you mean, Knievel? What do you mean that's not right? How do you know what was right? You didn't see my books yet or anything." He said, "I had a guy on each one of your gates with a clicker, and I know that that's not right, Aggie. You overpaid me." And Aggie sat back and laughed and said, "Hey, when I make money, people that work with me and for me make money." And that's when he said, "Aggie, your word is as good as gold." And that's what Mr. Iskey was saying. Ed, Evil said, "Aggie, your word is as good as gold." And there's also, besides that golden toothpick that my dad showed you, a gold nugget that's the size of your thumb, and that was on the other side of that key fob. Yeah, it was a beautiful deal.
Yeah.
Huh. And it'll be on eBay tomorrow.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so, yeah. No, well, you know, Evil had a gold walking stick, of course, and all that.
With
Yeah.
wild turkey
So he gave
inside
your
of it.
dad the miniature version of it.
Yeah,
It was
well.
a toothpick. But anyway. But anyway, no, you know, going back to the old hot rod, though, Ed, you did a lot of advertising in the magazines.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where the magazines changed. Did it become too expensive to advertise in the magazines compared to the old days?
It did. Well, we lost our advertising agency. That was one thing. So, the $3,000 ad from the old days now is about $10,000 a month, you know, for a full page. So, I was amazed. I started kind of bragging in my ads, and I always thought some engineer is going to really shoot me down. Maybe I'm not saying things just right, but by golly, it never happened. What it was is we'd begin to get a kind of a broad experience grinding a lot of different camps, and so there was we'd built up quite a bit of knowledge on the building hot rod engines and doing crazy things, you know, and wild cams, you might call
Here's another thing. Everybody always felt that because hot rod was on the West Coast, and of course, you know, the West Coast was a hotbed of hot rodding activity. It's like, what came first? The activity, I mean, did the activity grow because of the magazine, or did the magazine grow because of the activity? But then again, I mean, for both of you guys, if you weren't located on the West Coast, do you think you could have been as successful as you were? I mean, with the magazine on the West Coast and you not being here, the fact that they were able to come to your shop, report about it, get written up in the magazines, that had a big effect, didn't it?
Well, that was very important. Being local was very important. You know, all get together on for the magazine.
Yeah, well, Barsky was putting on that hot rod show at the Armory down in Barsky, yeah. And he hired 2 fellas, Peterson and Lindsay, to get the good-looking hot rods to put in the show and sell booth space to the speed shops and the manufacturers. So those 2 guys got the idea, maybe we ought to put out a hot rod magazine. And we heard that Barsky found out about it. So jokingly, he told them, "Hey, boys, you work for me. I hear we have a magazine coming out." And he was just joking because he didn't want to put any money into that magazine. But that got going, and he would come in person to collect the $10 for the ad. We were paying $10 a month for the ad.
You know, a very rare magazine, though, that they just recently reprinted in a book form was Throttle. And you wrote for Throttle, and so did your brother.
I used to write stories for it all the time.
It was only around 1 year.
Yeah.
1 year. It's very rare, very hard to find. Yeah. They found a complete set, and they reproduced them in a book form. But but you wrote for that. And then, you know, here's another thing. People don't understand that you guys, your careers were so touching upon so many things. One thing I can think about with you, Louie, is that you supplied the motor to Barris for the Munster coach.
That's right.
For the TV show, The Munsters. And
car, and I built the 8 carburetor manifold for the Munster coat for George Barris. I see George all the time.
Right. All right. Well, guys, thanks a lot. Ed Iskenderian, JC Agajanian, Louie Senter, myself, Ed Justice Jr.
Ed Justice doing a great job
Well,
behind the microphone.
thanks a lot. We had a great time today with all the people, and what a great tribute. All right, Ed Justice Jr. here. I'm with Dick Martain. He's the guy that's responsible for this great event that we had here today. It's not the first time he's done it, although you told me it's the last time you're going to do it.
It's the last time, Ed. You know, Ack was a special kind of guy, and that was something that it was a no-brainer. Of course, Tom Medley, Stroker McGurk, one of the first employees of Peterson, all the things he did as a publisher of Rod and Custom, and just the nature of the guy, that was a no-brainer. These 5 guys today, well, they're, like I've said many times, long after they're gone, their names will be remembered. And to get them all together, I'm sorry that Stu's health is such that, and that's one of the things that concerned me about doing this, it was now or never. And of course, I honestly believe that Iskey will live to be 100 and be just as sharp as a tack. But, this legacy is going away very quickly. And these are all World War II, 4 of them are World War II veterans. And of course, Nick is Korea. But think about what they did. They went off to war. They fought overseas. Ack Miller almost had his feet amputated because of Battle of the Bulge. And they came back and started companies and careers, and it's incredible. It's the great generation of hot rodders and the great generation of Americans, really, where if the trades that those guys learned in school have carried them all through till today.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, a lot of this stuff like Ack Miller, Battle of the Bulge, a lot of that stuff was not really known by a lot of people till it got later in life.
That's true.
They came back from the war, they went back to work, they carried on now in a new life, and the war was behind them, and they did their best not to carry the baggage and the battle scars of what they went through. Absolutely. Anybody that doesn't know the history of the Battle of the Bulge should look it up. Today you can Google it on the internet and read about it, because that was a monumental battle that we took a lot of casualties in. The Germans showed up in white uniforms in the snow, and our guys were there in the green uniforms, and you could spot them a mile away. And anyway, that's another story. But no, these guys are really some of the core guys of so much of the history of not just hot rodding. I mean, this is a thing that a lot of people don't realize, and Dick, you know so well. It's like I asked Iskey earlier to tell us about being involved with Jim Hall's IndyCar when they won in like 1980, 81, somewhere along there, that had an Iskey cam in it. And a lot of people didn't realize that. And they don't understand that it all started really in hot rodding. Dan Gurney was a hot rodder. Oh, yeah. Phil Hill was a hot rodder. All these guys were hot rodders before they became road racers, et cetera, et cetera. And it started on the streets.
Exactly. It branched out, just like Fred Carrillo. He couldn't afford to go to the lakes. He was just a kid. His mom was a single parent, so he street raced. He admits it, and there's no bones about it. He got kicked out of 2 high schools because he kept street racing in the front, and he went on to Hollywood High. He was not a child of wealth, and any of these kids will tell you when they grew up during the Depression, no, their parents were just struggling to get by, but they never looked for a handout. These guys created their own jobs if they couldn't find one.
And funny enough, none of them went into it for the money. They loved it.
Yep.
It was, as it was said many times today, and I was really happy to see this, it was a passion, because that's what it is. You got to be passionate about something. It's not a job then. It's a passionate, love, etc. And these guys, because they loved it so much, the money just came. And you've heard this saying so many times in my life, find something you like or you love and do it, and the money will follow. Absolutely. And these guys are great examples of that.
Well, Ed's dad and his 2 uncles, I mean, those kids grew up with nothing.
Right.
His one uncle was paralyzed, and they took a collection in the town to raise money for his medical costs. But the fact is, they heard of this product called Winds. They decided, gee, I think we're going to try and sell that stuff. And I'll never forget, I rode in the car with, Bev was driving and Zeke rode with us. We went to this place in Arcadia for lunch, and we were coming back on Foothill towards the business, and he said, you know, right about this time I started to cry. Why was that, Zeke? He said, well, I couldn't wait to get to California, and now we're leaving and we're going to Florida, and I don't know if we knew what the hell we were doing, but we get down there and started selling this wind oil, and one thing led to another, and the rest is history.
Right, and they eventually, they from that point on, they were working to get back to California.
Yeah.
They loved their time in the South. They had a great time down there. I was born in Florida during that time, but they always wanted to get back to California because they had so many friends out here in the racing fabrication industry and hot rodding and dry lakes and Bonneville and drag racing and all that. And no, they're the same like these guys. They had nothing. They had a dream.
Yep.
They were willing to work hard. They had a lot of desire, and the rest just followed.
Absolutely.
And they always, you know, the thing about these guys, like the one story about Louie, he'd give you the part even if you couldn't afford it, and then, you know, see if you can pay me for it.
Yep.
And like the joke is, some people did and some people didn't.
That's right.
These guys were all square shooters.
Yeah.
Every single one of them that were honored here today. There's not a story that guy's a crook or, boy, he really, you know, took advantage of me. They were the real deal.
They were. And what better place to have it? I mean, this place is evolving, Ed. I mean, all the time, new things coming in, stuff rotating out, people coming in that have never been here before, and they're just in awe of the amount of history. So I'm glad I did it. I'm glad we're here. And
of course, we were all friends of Wally, and this was Wally's dream and Wally's memory. I mean, this is a great place. Wally was a good friend of all of ours and a great guy. And, you know, a lot of things that a lot of people don't realize, just in a closing thought, after the war is when racing, modern racing as we know it today, was created. Wally Parks organized drag racing. Bill France organized stock car racing. Tony Holman organized the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to put it into its greatest years.
That's true.
I mean, these gentlemen created what we now know today as racing.
Absolutely.
And this is the generation that was with them. They were part of that. So anyway, great to talk to you, Dick. Thanks again
Thank
for
you.
all your hard work. Okay.